Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Tom Greatrix.
Number one, sir.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with Remembrance Day next week, I'm sure the whole House will join me in remembering all those who've sacrificed their lives defending our country and the freedoms that we hold dear. This time of year once again reminds us of the incredible job that our armed forces do to ensure our safety and our security. And with combat troops coming home from Afghanistan, we'll all want to pay particular tribute to the 453 soldiers who lost their lives and all those who were injured during this long campaign. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Tom Greatrix.
Can I firstly associate myself with the comments the Prime Minister made as we approach Remembrance Weekend, and we remember the contribution that so many have made from all parts of the UK in our armed forces. 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister said that concerned steelworkers at Clyde Bridge in my constituency and at sites across the UK should judge the Klesch Group by their actions. With their record of asset stripping in France and Holland and the overnight news of the failure to purchase Milford Haven, does the Prime Minister believe that it is in the public and national interest for the important strategic UK foundation steel industry to be sold to Klesch Group?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, let me agree with the honourable gentleman that it's very disappointing what has happened at Milford Haven, and we'll continue to work with the company concerned and try to find employment opportunities for all those who work there. In terms of Tata Steel, Clyde Bridge employs around 90 people. It's an integral part of the Long Products division, as he knows. We took support in the budget action in the budget to support heavy industry, and we are working with Klesch Group and with the Scottish Government. They say they are taking this on as a going concern. They've started their due diligence. I think the right thing to do is to work with them to try to make sure that their plans are to maintain that company. What we need overall is a situation in this country where we continue to see the steel industry grow as it has been growing under this government.
Mr. Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my constituents, may I offer my sympathy to the families of those killed and to those injured in the tragic factory fire in Stafford last week, and also praise the wonderful response of the emergency services. UK exports to countries outside the European Union have gone up by a remarkable 22% in the last 3 years, including transformers, generators and financial services IT systems from my own constituency. Could the Prime Minister look at the support given by UK export finance and whether this could be increased, particularly for small and medium enterprises?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, let me join my honourable friend in offering condolences to the families of those killed in what happened in Stafford, and we must get to the bottom of exactly how that fire started. In terms of supporting exporting companies, this is a very important part of our long-term economic plan, which is to make sure we get more small and medium-sized companies exporting. What we've done, as he will know, is that we've increased the budget of UK export finance. We've made available export contracts for SMEs worth over £1 billion, and will continue to work with those companies, including through the GREAT campaign, which is opening up new markets for British products, to make sure more of our companies choose to export.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, let me join the Prime Minister in recognising the importance of Remembrance Sunday. This year has particular significance, the year of our withdrawal from Afghanistan and, of course, 100 years since the start of the First World War. This is a moment to remember all those who lost their lives in war and everyone who has served our country. And that is why we will all be wearing our poppies with particular pride this year. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is nearly 2 years into his renegotiation with the European Union. He's got to get 27 countries to agree with him. How many has he got so far?
But what we have is a set of things that we want to sort out in Europe. We want to sort out safeguards for the single market. We want to get out of ever closer union. We want reform of immigration. But here's the difference. We have a plan. He has no plan. And we have a plan which will be put to the British people in an in-out referendum. Perhaps he can tell us when he gets to his feet, why is he frightened of the British public?
Mr. Speaker, my position on the referendum is exactly the same as his was before he lost control of his party. Now, I think we can take it. I think we can take it from the answer to that question that the answer is none. He's got no allies. Now he says his admiration for Angela Merkel is enormous. After the last couple of days, we can see the feeling's mutual, Mr. Speaker. If it's going so swimmingly, why do you think Chancellor Merkel has already rejected his proposals?
On that, he's completely wrong as well. She has herself said there are problems in terms of free movement that need to be dealt with. But he talks about support for a European referendum. Perhaps he'd like to address this. The former Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's decided to leave the House of Commons, yes, about the only person on the Labour benches who had any economic credibility, has said that a European referendum is inevitable. He says, and I quote, "It's a boil that has to be lanced." If it's inevitable, why is the right honourable gentleman so frightened of the British public?
Mr. Speaker, we know about the boil that's to be lanced. It's his divided party, Mr. Speaker. Now, he should listen to what his own MPs are saying. The honourable member for Basildon and Billericay, the one who hasn't defected yet, he says vague promises about a better deal for Britain will not wash. They know his renegotiation is going nowhere. Now, 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister gave an interview to the Daily Telegraph, and this is what it said, and I quote, "Mr. Cameron will not countenance leaving the EU and says he would never campaign for an outvote in an EU referendum." Is that still his position?
I think Britain is better off in a reformed European Union. But the point is this: I have a plan for renegotiating our situation and holding a referendum. He has got absolutely no plan whatsoever. And he talks about, Mr. Speaker, he talks about the views of backbenchers. Well, I've got the new view of one of his frontbenchers. This is the shadow deputy leader of the House, the man he appointed to put on the front bench, who has said this, and I'm sure the House will be interested. The Labour Party right now is in a dreadful position. Member for Dunfermline. He's been silent for too long. He goes on. He goes on. And we've got to be honest about ourselves. We have very low esteem with the electorate. The electorate looks at us and has no idea what our policies are. He says, he concludes, we are a moribund party. That's not the view of the commentators. It's not the view of the backbenchers. It's the view of the frontbenchers. It's official. It's a dead parrot.
Let's talk about his party. Defections, rebellions, demands for a pact with UKIP, and that's before the Rochester and Stroud by-election. And everyone will have heard.
Leader of the Opposition must be heard, however long it takes. That will happen, so people who are making a noise should calm themselves. Ed Miliband.
And he didn't answer this fundamental question that matters to businesses and families. He used to say he would never be for leaving the European Union. That was his position 2 years ago. All I'm asking him to, they asked what my position is, I want to stay in the European Union. He can't even answer the question. That was his position then. I'm just asking him to repeat the same words as he used then, that he would never campaign to leave the European Union. Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
I answered that question the last time round. But what's interesting? I want Britain to stay in a reformed European Union. But we need the reform. We have a plan. He has no plan. We say it's time to get out of ever closer union. What do they say? Nothing. We say you've got to safeguard the single market. What do they say? Nothing. We say you've got to reform immigration. What do they say? Nothing. Absolutely feeble. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, he faces a crisis in his leadership because he's got nothing to say about the deficit, nothing to say about the economy, nothing to say about welfare, and nothing to say about Europe. And the whole country can see they got a nothing leader of the opposition.
I do have to say to him, there's no point giving us the fight them on the beaches speech, because the last time he tried that was over Jean-Claude Juncker, and he lost 26 votes to 2. That's his leadership in Europe. Now, everyone will have heard his weasel words. He won't be straight with his backbenchers, and he won't be straight with the British people. He had a referendum on AV, and his position was crystal clear. He was for no. He had a referendum on Scotland, and his position was crystal clear, no. He wants a referendum on the EU. No ifs, no buts. Is he for in or is he for out?
He's asking me about a referendum that he won't support. The Labour Party is so chicken when it comes to trusting the British people. It's a completely unbelievable position. We say, renegotiate, hold the referendum, the British people make their choice. He won't even support a referendum. Now, he also says we should listen to backbenchers. Maybe you should try listening to the Honourable Member for Dudley North, who on immigration said this. Let's be honest about it. If you make a mistake, you should say sorry. So let me ask him again. Why won't you have a referendum, and will you apologise for the mess on immigration?
Speaker, British business will be holding their heads in their hands about a Prime Minister who cannot say that he wants to stay in the European Union. His renegotiation is going nowhere. He's caught between his backbenchers who want to leave and our national interest that demands we stay. That's why on Europe, he daren't say yes and he daren't say no. He's a don't know Prime Minister.
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, this is what happens if you write your questions before you listen to the answer. I couldn't be more clear. I want Britain to stay in a reformed European Union. And unlike the party opposite, we have a plan to get that reform and hold that referendum. But, Mr. Speaker, this comes at the end of a week when the last Labour Chancellor has said the Tories are right over a referendum. It comes at the end of the week when the Shadow Deputy Leader of the House has said Labour is in a dreadful position. And it comes at the end of a week when even John Prescott has said they got a problem in that they can't communicate in English. That is the case. That's it. When you get a lecture from John Prescott on the English language, you're really in trouble. Everyone can see it. A leader in crisis, a party with nowhere to go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I ask the Prime Minister a sensible question? Does he welcome the fact that for the first time ever, all local authorities and business leaders and LEPs in Somerset, Devon and Cornwall have reached agreement on the improvements necessary to upgrade our transport infrastructure of the South West? Will my right honourable friend agree to meet with a small delegation from the peninsula so that we can discuss these proposals and for him to help us put in place a long-term connectivity plan?
I'm very happy to have that meeting with my right honourable friend, and I think he's absolutely right about the need to upgrade the transport links to the South West. That's why we've been carrying out the rail study, but even before that we spent over £31 million on important rail improvements and a number of road improvements. For instance, the King Kerswell bypass have already been put in place, and our roads programme includes major and important work for the South West. But happy to hold that meeting.
Debbie Abrahams.
Today's Health Select Committee report on mental health services for children and young people describes how budgets have been frozen or cut, services are being closed, and young people are being sent hundreds of miles away from their families or kept in police cells because there are no beds. Is this what the Prime Minister means by parity of esteem for mental health services?
Yes, Prime Minister.
What I'd say to the Honourable Lady is there's a whole series of steps that we have taken in difficult economic circumstances, of which the first is parity of esteem in the NHS Constitution. We've seen a big expansion of talking therapies that weren't available under the last government. We've introduced for the first time a waiting time standard for young people with psychosis, a waiting time standard that never existed under the previous Labour government. And for the first time, we have a minister with dedicated responsibility for child and adolescent mental health services. Now, of course, there is much more that needs to be done. The demands on our mental health services are very great, but these are steps not previously taken by previous governments, and it's because we put the money in and because we've made important reforms to get rid of bureaucracy. But all of these things are only possible if you have a strong economy backing a strong NHS.
Eric Ola Renshaw.
Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, the fountains of Trafalgar Square, right through to Lancaster Museum and Fleetwood Marine Hall, were lit purple to raise awareness of pancreatic cancer. Can I ask the Prime Minister if you look very carefully at the report produced last week by the All-Party Group, with the support of Pancreatic Cancer UK, calling for more research into this dreadful disease before it becomes Britain's fourth biggest killer in terms of cancer.
Minister.
Well, I pay tribute to my honourable friend and the all-party group for the work that it does, and I know how close this issue is to his heart and how much he feels this personally. The difficult situation here is that the one-year survival rate for those diagnosed with pancreatic cancer is around 20%, and the 5-year survival rate is only 5%, so it is not good enough. What we're doing is spending more money on research. We're investing a record £800 million over 5 years in a series of biomedical research centres, including at the Liverpool Pancreas Biomedical Research Unit. So what we need is the research to go in and for these new treatments to be properly tested so that we can improve the cancer survival rates here as we have for other cancers.
Ryan Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 4 weeks ago, a 150-year-old industry in my constituency announced that it will be pulling out of Northern Ireland. That's the loss of 900 jobs, the equivalent of 32,000 jobs in the United Kingdom. To say it's a body blow would be an understatement. Will the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and industry leaders to see if we can find a strategy and a way of keeping some of those jobs in Northern Ireland?
Well, I'm very happy to discuss this with the honourable gentleman. Perhaps on a forthcoming visit to Northern Ireland we might be able to meet in Ulster and discuss these issues. I think the issue he refers to is also the plain paper packaging issue, where I do want us to see us make progress. I think there are important health benefits here, but I'm happy to discuss the issue with him.
Mr. Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend may be aware that my constituents, Dr. and Mrs. Turner's granddaughter, died of the dreadful disease meningitis B. 30 babies die of this a year. Much more worryingly, 300 babies are severely maimed. Indeed, there's a baby in Bristol at the moment that's facing quadruple applications. There is a licensed and safe vaccine available. The issue is cost. Will my right honourable friend please intervene and see what can be done to resolve this issue?
Minister.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for bringing this up. I'm certainly keen to help if I can. If we were able to introduce a vaccine, I think we'd be the first country in the world to bring in a vaccine nationally. But as he says, there are issues, and that's why, following advice from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, we're having discussions with the producer of this vaccine to see if we can find a cost-effective way of doing this. But the case that he raises and many other heartbreaking cases show how desirable it is to make progress on this issue.
Ben Bradshaw.
People in Devon face being denied operations if they're overweight or smokers, as well as the loss of all fertility treatment, cataract operations restricted to just one eye, and the closure of Exeter's very successful walk-in centre because of the unprecedented financial crisis facing my local NHS. Does he still think his massive and costly reorganisation has been a success?
Minister.
What we did by reducing the bureaucracy in the NHS is save £5 billion in this Parliament, and that is why nationally there are over 8,000 more doctors and 2,500 more nurses. We've only been able to do that because there are 20,000 fewer administrators in the NHS. Those are the figures. He may shake his head, but those are the figures. In terms of his local clinical commissioning group, it is getting an £18 million cash increase in the next year, and it's also going to get an additional £19 million through the Better Care Fund. So locally there should be improvements in services rather than the picture he paints.
Mr. Stephen Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm concerned the revised criteria for exams in religious studies have yet to be published by the Department of Education. I'm also informed, however, that the hold-up is in number 10. Can the Prime Minister confirm this is not the case and that they will be published very soon?
Prime Minister.
I will look carefully at the issue that he raises. It is important to get this issue of how religious education is carried out right. If there is a blockage in my office, I will make sure that I'll make sure that I will go into dino rod mode and try and get rid of it.
Margaret Beckett.
At his party conference, the Prime Minister promised that if re-elected, he would cut income tax by £7 billion. Now, that money's got to come from somewhere. So just how big an increase in VAT has he got in mind this time?
What I'd say to the right honourable lady is that we've demonstrated in this Parliament that if you manage the economy properly, it is possible to reduce spending, to reduce the deficit, and and to reduce taxes at the same time. That's exactly what we have done. During this Parliament, we've taken the personal allowance, the amount you can earn before paying income tax, from around £6,000 to £10,500. I know the Labour Party don't want to hear good news, but people are paying less income tax under this government, and we've taken 3 million people out of income tax altogether, and if re-elected, we want to raise to £12,500 the amount of money that people can earn before they start paying income tax. Why do we want to do this? Because on this side of the House, we think people should have more of their own money to spend as they choose.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday's announcement by Rolls-Royce of significant job losses across the country will devastate people and homes and could well damage our national engineering skills base. Will my right honourable friend meet me and employee representatives from Rolls-Royce to see if we can try and minimise the effect of this by finding alternative engineering jobs and to preserve our vital engineering expertise? And can he reassure my constituents in Filton that he will continue to champion our world-renowned and world-class defence export manufacturing?
I can certainly assure my honourable friend I'll do everything I can to champion companies like Rolls-Royce, whether in civil aerospace or in defence aerospace. I try and take them on as many of my trade missions as possible because they're an absolutely world-class, world-beating company. Obviously, it's disappointing that they plan to reduce the number of people they employ. It's not yet clear how many of those job reductions will be here in the UK. Of course, Rolls-Royce employ over 25,000 people here in the UK. And if we look at what's happened to the aerospace industry over the last 4 years, employment is up by 10%, exports are up by 48%, turnover is up by a fifth. So this is a successful industry that's being backed by our modern industrial strategy, but we need to do everything we can to make sure this company and others like it continue to succeed in the years ahead.
Ellen Jones.
In 2010, Warrington had 127 full-time equivalent GPs. At the last count, it had 97, and some of my constituents are waiting up to 2 weeks for an appointment. Is his failure to provide access to basic health care a result of deliberate policy, or is it simply carelessness?
Minister.
Well, what I'd say to the honourable lady is, first of all, there are 1,000 more GPs across the country today than there were in 2010. And if she wants to know what has happened in Warrington under this government, when I became Prime Minister, there were 130 people who were waiting a year for operation. Today, that number is 0. That is what's happened under this government. Now, because we're making the money available, it is possible to have more GPs coming into your area alongside the 1,000 we've already introduced.
Smith.
At a time of economic crisis, it was the stability of the coalition that has helped us build a stronger economy. Does the Prime Minister agree that in creating a fairer society, any further rise in the tax allowance should not be done on the backs of the poor?
Minister.
What I say to the honourable friend is that it has been possible in this Parliament to raise the personal allowance, to take some of the poorest people out of tax, 3 million people taken out of tax, and a tax cut for 26 million people, at the same time as making decisions that are fair for all, like, for instance, making sure the NHS gets an extra £12.7 billion. Now, of course, you do have to make difficult decisions, and some of the difficult decisions we have made have been looking at things like the Home Office budget, where the police are being far more efficient than they were, and making changes to welfare, each and every one which has been opposed by the party opposite. The fact is, if you manage the national finances carefully, get our economy to grow properly, and ignore the Shadow Chancellor who nearly bankrupted the country, you can do these things together.
Mr. Speaker, after reading yesterday's front page of the Times, can I welcome the Prime Minister's late conversion to ID cards, even if they are, for now, virtual and without Labour's biometric functionality? If the Prime Minister intends to keep his promise to keep our borders safe and secure, can he tell the House when the system will be in place and why it has taken him so long.
Prime Minister.
That's a very interesting development that Labour are now back in favour of ID cards. I thought even they had seen the folly of their ways. What we are introducing is proper border checks so that we can count people in and count people out, something that was never available under Labour, something they actually helped to get rid of, and also making sure that we know more about those who are coming and when they've left.
Andrew Lansley.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend will recall our support for the training of Libyan troops at Bassingbourn Barracks in my constituency of South Cambridgeshire. Does he share my concern that the programme failed to maintain discipline and the consequences of that were very serious in my local community? Will he undertake the Ministry of Defence will give my constituents a full accounting for the failures in the delivery of this programme? Will he also agree that the Libyan soldiers should now be repatriated to Libya and there is no basis for any of them to seek or receive asylum in this country?
No, well, I agree with my right honourable friend on every front. What has happened at Bassingbourn in Cambridgeshire is completely unacceptable. These are criminal actions, and I've asked the Chief of the Defence Staff for a report into this. A decision was taken at the National Security Council, which I chaired, on the 28th of October, to end this training altogether. The trainees will be returning to Libya in the coming days, and in the meantime, all unescorted visits from the camp have been stopped altogether.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Which does the Prime Minister believe is more immoral? Raising VAT to 20% or concealing the intention to do so?
I tell you what is immoral, and that is racking up debts for our children that you're not prepared to pay yourself. That is what we inherited. We inherited the biggest budget deficit of any country anywhere in the world. That is the moral, or rather the immoral inheritance that we received from the Labour Party.
Turning back to the economy, is the Prime Minister aware that the region with the most tech start-ups outside of London and the fastest rate of growth in private sector businesses over the last quarter and the highest rise in value of exports is the North East of England? And does he agree with me that we should stick to the long-term economic plan so that we all have the benefit?
My honourable friend makes an important point, and it is notable that when we look at things like small business creation, exports, investment, the growth is coming from around the country, including the North East. And that is a huge contrast. Under 13 years of Labour, our economy, for every 10 jobs created in the South, they only created 1 in the North. That is the record. That is the record of the last Labour government. What we need to do is increase entrepreneurialism and start-ups in every part of our country. That's what start-up loans are doing. That's what the Enterprise Allowance Scheme is doing. There's a new spirit of enterprise in Britain, and this government is backing it.
Theresa Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2012, my constituent, Sam Boone, died whilst on a World Challenge trip to Morocco. He was 17. The coroner was so concerned that the multiple failings, she issued a Section 28 report to prevent future deaths to the Minister of State for Schools. There are British safety standards, but these are entirely voluntary. Why is adherence to these standards not compulsory so no other parent like Mr. and Mrs. Boone have to suffer?
Prime Minister.
Well, what I'd like to do is look very carefully at the case the Honourable Lady mentions and write to her about it. This is important about making sure that safety standards are upheld and trying to prevent tragedies like the one that she refers to.
Mr. Martin Horwood.
It has been absolutely right to push for 90% availability of superfast broadband by next year and universal basic broadband services. But is the Prime Minister aware that these targets could be missed even in urban areas like Cheltenham? And will he ask ministers to make sure that local delivery matches the government's ambition?
No, I will certainly do that. We review very regularly the performance of the broadband targets because this is absolutely essential, particularly for rural areas. If you're left off superfast broadband, it's much more difficult to take part in the modern economy. I think the progress has been very, very good. I think it's made a big difference now that British Telecom are prepared to publish all the areas that are not yet covered so that other companies can come in and see what they're able to provide. We're also making available broadband vouchers for small businesses, which are very successful, and we can look to see whether we can expand that. But I'm absolutely convinced that spreading broadband right around the country is one of the most important priorities for this government.
Michael Meacher.
Since the Prime Minister likes to bang on about Labour overspending, is he aware... aware that in Labour's 11 years before the crash in 2008, the biggest deficit was 3.3% of GDP, whereas the Thatcher major governments racked up deficits bigger than that in 10 out of their 18 years. So who are the overspenders? It's a no-brainer.
There's only one problem with what the right honourable gentleman said, which is the deficit they left and we inherited was 11.5% of GDP. It was bigger than almost any other countries anywhere in the world. And if you don't believe me, you can listen to your own Shadow Chancellor, and he said this: I think the fact you had the massive global financial crisis, which happened on our watch, meant that people saw their living standards hit. I don't think we'd be being straight with people if we only said it was the financial crisis. It was also after 13 years in government we'd made some mistakes. There we have it. Some mistakes. You bet there were mistakes. Overspending, over-borrowing, over-taxing, wasteful welfare, bloated expenditure, a complete and utter failure, and it's extraordinary they're still sitting there on the front bench.
The Prime Minister will be aware that millions of people have been to see the 888,246 poppies at the Tower of London, designed and commissioned by Paul Cummings from Derby. Would he congratulate the hundreds of volunteers that have helped make them in Derby and the hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that have helped to plant them in Derby to commemorate this very important centenary?
I certainly join my honourable friend in praising all those who've been involved in this extraordinary project, which has, I think, brought forward from the British public a huge amount of reverence for those who've given their lives and served our country. The numbers going to see this display have been truly extraordinary, and it is worth remembering that out of this display a lot of good will come, because as I understand it, the poppies are being auctioned to charities, and a lot of money for military and veterans charities will actually be there to do good in many years to come. So it's an extraordinary display, and one that the country can be very proud of.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last 12 months, it is estimated that 24,000 people have died from diabetes-related complications. Next Friday is World Diabetes Day. As one of the 3.2 million diabetics, can I urge the Prime Minister to do all he can to raise awareness on this issue, in particular to introduce measures that will reduce the amount of sugar in our food and drink? We can prevent the onset of type 2 diabetes, and we can save lives.
Prime Minister.
I think the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right to raise the importance of this issue. The consequences of diabetes, in terms of appalling things like leg amputations, cost the NHS literally billions of pounds a year. And if we can get better at preventing diabetes and then testing and helping diabetics themselves better, we can make huge savings while improving people's qualities of life. I gather he also wants me to try and ban sugar and fizzy drinks in number 10 Downing Street for 24 hours. I'll try and negotiate that with my children. He also, as I understand it, he wants me to light my home blue, which is something I'm all in favour of and keeping it that way for some time to come.
Mr. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HS3 and other improvements to rail connectivity in the North West are important, but the recent parliamentary approval given to the Able UK development in northern Lincolnshire emphasised the importance of connections on the South Transpennine route between Cleethorpes and Manchester. Can my right honourable friend assure me that my constituency and northern Lincolnshire will figure in future proposals to improve connectivity so that the area can benefit from the benefits of the government's long-term economic plan?
I can certainly assure my honourable friend that we're looking at all the elements of east-west connectivity and trying to make sure that we bring the benefits of faster journey times and greater capacity and electrification to all parts of the country. And I know the Chancellor was listening very carefully to the statement that he made.
Order.